Yeah, how are you doing? So you're all very welcome to our talk today. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. And today we're going to be talking about our experience in-game animation. Um, but first, we'd just like to introduce ourselves. I'm James Stacey. I'm VP of Computer Graphics and Production for Brownback Films, and this is
Yeah.
Luke.
Hey, I'm Luke. I'm a software developer in Brown Bag. I like to work on CG workflows and pipeline artist tools, things like that.
Great, thanks, Luke. So in this talk, we'll primarily focus on a character called Jelly, who appeared in one of our animation projects that we animated in Unreal. We'll then talk a little bit about our rigging pipeline in Unreal and also our animation pipeline. But first, we wanted to just give you a little bit of context about who Brownback are. So we're very old. We've been in an animation studio for 30 years. In fact, we've had our 30th party just last Friday, so we're still sore heads. No, I promised I wouldn't do a stereotypical Irish joke about sore heads and drinking, so I won't do that. But we've been around for a while. We've 800 staff worldwide in studios located in Dublin, Toronto, New York, and Bali. As well as a slate of our own IP shows, we also do work for clients Disney, Netflix, Nickelodeon, and Apple TV. So I wanted to show you the type of shows and characters we do, and give you some stats of the volume of animation we produce. So hopefully this gives you some context or framing on the context we're operating in when we make decisions on software. We have the capacity to run 16 to 20 lines of production, which means that we can have 16 or 20 animation productions running in parallel at any one time. 50% of these are CG animation, the rest are 2D animation, mainly out of our Toronto studio. Each show, we generally produce around 500 minutes of animation. Our typical CGI show has 150 crew, 50 of which would be Maya keyframe animators. So in each production cycle, we can average around 250 to 350 Maya animators working at our projects at any one time. So the optimization and innovation of keyframe animation pipeline is really key to our efficiency as a studio. So any small wins we can do at the shot level, they can compound and make really big gains over the course of a production cycle. We've always kept, Brownback Films have always kept an eye on real-time animation, starting with Valve's SFM in 2009. We did a project back then. We tried to do a previous project, an animation project. It's fair to say with limited success, it wasn't ready. So we've had several small Unity and Unreal R&D projects since then. But it wasn't until the release of Unreal 5 that we really started to seriously explore Unreal for keyframe animation. So over the last 2 to 3 years, we began a multi-year feasibility project looking at integrating Unreal into all aspects of our pipeline. So using several pitch and test projects, some of which were for actual projects going into production, we explored the benefits of Unreal, and one of those test projects we're going to use as a test case for you today. Okay, so the benefits of porting a pipeline to Unreal were clear to us for the lighting, look dev, render and comp. That's been discussion in multiple talks this year in Unreal Fest, but also previously as well. So we're not going to focus on that. Because when it came to keyframe animation, a lot of the studios that we talked to and a lot of projects, they always animated in Maya, and then port it into Unreal. So this is a very logical approach, and that's why a lot of studios do it. It's a road-tested pipeline. It's a proven track record, similar to ourselves. You can use existing talent, so there's no training required, which can be quite expensive. The animators have their existing muscle memory. They have lots of tools and tips and tricks that they can use. So they have a existing flow. And also it might be possible to get the desired character deformation in the characters or creatures for a particular show. And in some respects, that's still true. If you're doing very high-end creature work, that's still the case. But as I showed you the previous shows, the type of work we did, we felt very strongly that we could achieve what we needed to in Unreal. Okay, so why did we ignore all that real solid industry wisdom and decide we would move our rigging and animation pipeline into Unreal? So over the course of the last few years, we saw significant benefits. The main one, and it's kind of been a key word in Unreal Fest this year, is context. And it's a really important point. The animators can see the visual effects, lighting, materials all in viewport. So with all that context, they can make much better decisions. And while it might mean that their actual keyframe animation gets faster, it does mean that they can essentially deal with mistakes and issues right there and deal with it immediately. So what that can do is it can fix mistakes immediately, meaning upstream departments become much more efficient. So that's huge. So as I said before, the volume of animation that we do, the amount of shots, that QC gain can be huge. And things like cut through, mesh coming through clothes, hair, etc., that can cause major issues. And we don't see it until it's rendered and it comes back and we have a QC team that gets kicked back. So you're kind of doing this loop. So what we found is Unreal kind of cuts that out, which is huge. And I think there was a talk yesterday where you mentioned that everyone becomes a QC artist. And I think that's a really important point. And that can save a lot of fixes that we see in our linear pipeline as well. Also continuity. Animators can have access to keys in any shots in a sequence or any shot, and so they grab those keys, they can add it to the start and end frame, so continuity can get improved, so that improves productivity there. And also in terms of animator resourcing, it's a very flexible workflow in terms of you can assign animators either individual shots or sequence of shots. So in our big animation teams, like you have different grades from junior up to senior. So being able to assign in a clean way through Unreal is a really positive benefit as well. And also, I think a key point is that Unreal becomes a pipeline hub. So everyone's working in the same ecosystem. So in terms of DCC round tripping, going in and out, in and out, in and out, if the animation rigging is also in Unreal, that limits that. So there's much less pipeline support, and the animators and the pipeline team, it can be much more efficient and have less work. And also, when we're in that ecosystem, it means that we can start leveraging other aspects of Unreal in the animation pipeline, such as Niagara and the other game-orientated animation tools as well. So that's a real big plus. And looking at Chase's talk yesterday in terms of their roadmap, that's really exciting as well. So we're excited to see all that. So what I'd like to do next is show you one of our test projects. So this is an actual project. It's hopefully going to production next year. But we fully animated in Unreal, lip sync, everything really. Final picture out of Unreal, no comp. So I'll show you that now. There's sound.
Last bit.
Oh yeah.
Now to make it. Need this. Yeah. Gotcha. There. No. Need bigger arms. I've got those. Cloudy. Is this all right? Thank you. Bye, Leaf.
Ooh,
Hi, Jelly.
what's that?
My shop.
Oh, can we play shot? I'm really good at it. Please.
Huh.
Oh, hello. I'm Lady Bagpipes.
Hello, lady.
I've heard your shop's the finest in the land. Is it true? Tell me.
It's true.
I'm unbeatable. Beautiful things.
Sorry, Ladybag Poops. It's not for sale.
Okay. Can I buy this, please?
Negative.
My long lost stand-up baby. Can I buy a back, please?
Oh, no. Sorry, Miss T-Rex.
Is anything for sale?
No.
Ah, the shop is broken.
Oh, Oh, sorry, Jelly. I just like my shop the way it is.
But if you can't buy anything, it's not a shop.
It is. It's just not that kind of shop.
It's not?
We can still play shop, but just differently.
Differently. I'm on a not shopping spree, and I demand you sell me nothing.
Certainly, Lady Bagstraps.
I don't wish to buy this, or this. Ugh.
That's your bag.
Oh, yeah. Don't sell me anything.
Hello. How much?
It's not that kind of shop.
Great.
Thanks. So we're just going to go into a little more detail on one of the characters, Jelly, that purple one. So like James was talking about earlier, our character Deforms is a really important part of their appeal. So we really needed to verify whether Unreal is up to this task. And we'd animated a whole bunch of characters in, I think we've done 4 kind of shorts completely animated in Unreal before this. And each one has they're all different. They all have their own set of challenges and whatnot. But Jelly in particular was especially interesting because, you know, he's made of jelly. So how he deforms is an integral part of his character. So we started off, we have the animatic tech breakdown here. We went through with rigging, identified all of the challenging cases we'd need to address, and set aside some time to look into different ways of tackling them in Unreal. So they're listed there, and I just want to go through a few slides of them in a bit more detail. Sorry.
I'll do that.
So the first solution was fairly simple, really. We needed to be able to support this kind of fluid slug-like motion where his whole body is treated as one volume deforming together. So in a typical character, we'd have separate chains for the spine and the neck and the head, these different modules. But for Jelly, what we did, we just had one spine module running from his pelvis to the top of his head. So yeah, that meant we could kind of grab him from either end and waggle him about like a worm. Then the next issue was handling body and face compression and stretching. So our standard skeleton already comes with these 4 perpendicular auxiliary joints at each articulation point that we use for, with a pose driver set up for volume preservation. But in this case, we just hijacked those joints and used them as to kind of emulate the effects of a lattice. So you can see in the video in the middle there, those red control points are what they're doing. So these FFD bones had a very, very soft fall off, which meant that many bones influenced the vertex a very, very small amount. So we needed to be very careful while, weight painting for this. We had to increase Unreal's skin influence from 8 to 12 influences per vertex, because otherwise we get this kind of tearing and skinning artifact. The next, kind of a related point is we didn't use like traditional spherical eye geometry, and instead the eye surface is skinned to deform along with the body. And because the eye is entirely material based, we could still aim and manipulate it just like we could with a conventional eye rig. It's also necessary to implement kind of equivalent to a Maya follicle or like a point on poly constraint for his teeth. Otherwise the animators have to keep counter animating the teeth when they moved the jaw. So we Unreal doesn't have that feature natively, so we kind of implemented it with a parent constraint in control rig, where all of the parents of the parent constraint kind of corresponded to the the bones that would have influenced that vertex. And they're, yeah, it was manually set up. So it's something we want to develop a bit more in future because it's quite an important feature for us, as well as to take into account blend shape deformation with our follicle substitute.
Will do.
Thanks. So yeah, at some shots, the deformation is so extreme, it made more sense to create a separate character variant. So here, a new mesh is modeled for the splat mesh. So it needs to line up with the topology around the face so that the skinning and blend shapes will transfer. So yeah, you might have, the eagle-eyed of you may notice that there is actually a Maya rig down there. So it's kind of, we did still do the skinning in Maya with our rig builder tools I'll talk about later. And the rig is kind of a side effect of using those tools. The animators didn't actually use it. It was actually the modeler using the rig in Maya to pose it so that he could get a start on a kind of weird shape. And then because we use Control Rig's construction event, using a variant character like this, where everything is, the bones are all in very different places from the base character, but with Control Rig, the Control Rig just snaps into place, and there was very little work to do on Unreal to implement that. And then, yeah, we often have this problem with characters that have big torsos and small arms, that they usually require the shoulder to be able to move around the body, so the character can, reach things or hug people, things like that. And you can see in the animatic there, at the first panel, the character's arms are by his side, and then, the shoulders roll around to the front of his body. And Jelly will also encounter very severe deformations as he's animating, so we didn't want to negatively impact the deformations of the shoulder while doing that. So we opted for the kind of floating arms solution to fix this, so the arms can be placed anywhere. So this allows for a very wide range of motion and all these crazy poses without affecting the body mesh. But one big problem with floating arms, or floating limbs in general, with characters, is how to manage the seam if you've got these separate meshes. So we resolved this in the material. So you can see on the left, we added Jelly to a custom depth pass, but his arms are actually translucent, so they're absent from that pass. So then when we go to render the translucency pass, we can find the depth of the arm versus the pixel depth and compare it against the depth from the custom depth. So then we can know whether or not the arm is close to the body or not. And it's basically, if the arm is close to the body, we just make it more transparent. So it gives the effect, the illusion that the arm is blending into the body. It's also then kind of controlled with a painted map to make sure things like the fingers and the hands don't blend with the body when he touches his body. So yeah, it's simple but effective little trick. It does have a few limitations. We had to enable order-independent transparency, which is still experimental feature in Unreal. We had some stability issues with that, but it's actually working really well in 5.4, which is good. Still experimental, but yeah, it's great. And then some deformations are a lot simpler to implement in the material using world position offset than as part of the skinning and the rig. So for us, this is kind of a newish concept coming from linear animation for us, and this opens up a huge array of possibilities. Really excited about all the things we can do with that. Actually, there was another character, the cloudy character in the short, that is using some of these techniques as well. And we're also very excited to hear that nanite skeletal meshes will be enabled soon, and do some really crazy characters with that, I'm sure. But yeah, here, like the first case, there's just a simple wave being propagated through his body for when he's he starts to get emotional. And then again, just material based as well for the eyes. They're parallax occlusion material. Again, rather than having multiple meshes for all those parts of the eye, which would be a real pain to skin. We didn't have lattices and stuff at this point when we didn't use the deformer graph in this project. So we have been able to do that in an eye just with the shader is simplifies the skinning so much. And for any scenarios where the material drives the character deformation rather than being part of the rig, it's still exposed to the animator via control rig. So it's very familiar for them. As far as the animator is concerned, they don't know or care whether a certain deformation is happening with skinning or with material or some other means. And yeah, I know these techniques, like if you've been using game engines for a long time, they're not especially new, but for linear animation, being able to do this stuff in the viewport for an animator without we could do this stuff maybe with an offline render and stuff, but the critical point is the animator seeing it, like James was saying.
Exactly.
So this was another relatively simple one. The arms were additional skeletal mesh asset that's just activated for this shot. But it brings up this issue of variance. So our character assets are all blueprint actors. So it's very satisfying and very cheap to create these one-off character variants like this with child blueprint classes.
Yeah, and that's a key point for the type of volume of animation we do. We do a lot of costume changes for Halloween parties, birthday parties, Christmas. So having an assembly or a character variant pipeline can be very tricky. In the linear pipeline, there's a lot of work that has to go into making that seamless. So with Unreal, it's much easier. So that's another huge gain for high volume production.
And again, because of how the arm blending is handled in the material rather than as part of the skinning, very straightforward to just connect on additional body parts and have them blend in. So those slides were all very specific about Jelly, the character. So I wanted to now describe some of our current process behind rigging and getting the characters into Unreal. So like I mentioned earlier, we still build the rigs in Maya with our in-house rig builder tool. This makes it very straightforward to get a very wide range of characters, ensures we get consistency across all of the shows in all the rigs. The skeleton, the skinning, the blend shapes, they'll later be baked to a high-resolution mesh and exported to FBX. And for our first couple of Unreal test projects, we considered the Maya rigs to be like an insurance fallback in case we'd hit some insurmountable issue animating in Unreal and we'd have to revert to animating in Maya and exporting FBX. But we actually never had to resort to that. But we still build the full rig in Maya. It's still necessary to use at the moment for us to prepare the facial shapes before baking to blend shapes. We use it to pose for the corrective command joints setup. And like you saw, we also use it for those special character variant situations, like the melted on the floor, where the modeler uses the rig rather than the animator. So that and the fact we also make use of NG skin tools and their layered skin weighting. Very important. We skin on the. I think we've looked at in-engine skinning for props and stuff, but not yet for characters.
I think with the roadmap that we're seeing as well, I think in Chase's talk, he's showing the update in skinning, and now it's not released yet. But yeah, again, as well, I mentioned training earlier on, is that with our riggers, if they're using our existing rig builder and using the existing skinning tools, it just makes that part of it much faster. But as Unreal starts to build that capability, which seems to be coming in the next few versions, we'll move everything over into Unreal.
So then subdivision, again, is a feature we heavily rely on in our offline pipeline to get smooth character silhouettes. And Unreal, there is no like post-deformation mesh subdivision. So the skeleton mesh has to be pre-subdivided to get that smooth silhouette. And initially we did try skin the high-res mesh directly in Maya. Kind of as expected, it really slowed things down, caused a lot of issues, trying to paint weights on a very high-res mesh. It was just kind of slow and not fun. So instead we this is skinning in Maya. We skinned the low-res mesh like normal and transferred the skinning and blend shapes to a subdivided model just prior to writing the FBX. So just go into a bit more detail on that. For the facial shapes, we iterate all the parameters of the facial rig in Maya, which may drive a combination of blend shapes and skinning deformation and other things. And for each target, we write out we save out a subdivided blend shape of that facial pose. So we get a lot of them, and they become the blend shapes in Unreal. And then for the skinning transfer, we copy the skinning from the low-res mesh to the high-res mesh, and then we use NG Skin Tools weight smoothing to resolve this kind of linear interpolation artifact that you get with the skinning. When you just transfer from low-res to high-res without smoothing it, it looks terrible. This transfer process isn't perfect still. Like there's cases when there's overlapping geometry, like if fingers are close together or hair is overlapping, like hair clumps, where the transfer, it'll get confused. So it's definitely something we need to sort out in future. But in general, it works very well. And of course, another necessary step of an exporter is to convert our multi-root modular skeleton into a single root one and copy all that skinning across to the new joints. I feel like we copy a lot of skinning.
Yeah.
I feel like I've said that a lot. So then we have an Unreal compatible skeleton that's subdivided and has all the blend shapes, and we can import it in. So that process all kind of happens as part of our Maya rig publish. We get an FBX. And then on the Unreal side, yes, of course, we're using control rigs. We got a fairly extensive control rig module library. So they kind of mirror our Maya modules. So we'd have one for arms, one for legs, one for, all these different components of a rig. It does predate the official modular control rigs in 5.4. So we're definitely going to migrate to that and make sure we're compatible with that going forward. But the basic idea is the same. Our control rig modules contain public functions. We keep them in a rigging content plugin so they can be shared across all of our projects. So they all use the same modules. And each module, so say the module is an arm, for example, will contain a setup event forwards and backwards for that particular body part. And then the character-specific control rig then makes calls to those modules. And we also often need to add in additional very character-specific rig logic on top of that. It's not just a matter of literally putting the modules in. So there's some little bit of glue inside the control rig as well, just to make it all gel together. Maybe that wouldn't be necessary with modular control rig, I'm not sure. And since our control rig modules, they were built initially to mirror the Maya modules, it's very familiar for an animator coming across because all of the main controls will still be there, colored the same way and behave as you expect. But it is still, it is just a starting off point. We know that Unreal and Maya are different, and we don't want to, just have a one-to-one mapping just for the sake of it, because there are things Maya does. There's a lot of things Unreal does that are just we don't lock ourselves away from those things for the sake of compatibility. We want to use it all.
Yeah, that's it. And just in terms of transition from that training piece that I talked about earlier on, just that the animators recognizing the rigs, it'll just help that buy-in process of, animators like to animate the way they want to animate. So it's quite a lot of work just to make sure that they're bought into it and trained. So a similar rig and something they're familiar with, similar controls, really helps that as well.
And yeah, so we did initially use, this is for our expand joints for volume preservation. We did initially use this Pose Wrangler plugin for Maya, which looks very impressive. But we actually reverted to our existing process that we use on our offline shows, which uses set-driven keys on a kind of an in-house pose driver. Just because it was more familiar for our riggers working in Maya to set up, they were just that bit faster at it. But we'll probably revisit this in future as, that Pose Wrangler plugin comes with, I think it's called Pose Driver Connect. It simplifies the setup on the Unreal side. So this image here is the post-process animation blueprint, and we had to make that by hand, but which was a bit of a pain. So to export our correctives from Maya, we wrote a script to convert our set-driven key correctives to a keyframe animation sequence, and imported that animation as an animation sequence asset and converted it to a pose asset, and then the animation graph makes use of that. So yeah, a bit of a look ahead for the things we're planning next, just with regards to rigging and animation. Like I said, updating our current rig modules to be forward compatible with the 5.4 rigging modules. Doesn't seem like a huge amount of work to do that, I don't think. Deformer graph, obviously this is a really big one for us, especially I think like a lattice is we use a heck of a lot. And our workarounds kind of work, but it'd be nice to have a proper lattice. Animator tools, obviously, every studio has an awful lot of custom tooling for their animators. There's also things like Animbot and MG tools, and it's a big ecosystem for my animation tools. So yeah, we need to work on that. ML Deformer, yeah, definitely an amazing feature. We certainly see use cases for this in future. For unit testing, this was so it's relatively easy in Unreal when you're a rigger making a rig update to kind of validate that your rig change won't break the shots, because you can see the shots as you're editing the rig. But even so, mistakes happen, obviously, and especially when you have, it's modular, and like have a module which uses another module, and like there's a dependency of things, so you don't quite know the knock-on change that editing a module up here would have. So something we'd like to explore just to give us more confidence when we make rig changes is unit testing our rig modules. So what that means is we would make like a small level sequence that exercises all of the features of the module. And then when it's working as expected, we'd bake that to an animation sequence asset. And then whenever we make a change, we could compare the new evaluation against the known good evaluation and see if it's still working as we like. We of course do calisthenics tests as well, but it's nice to have something that's actually automated, telling you things are working rather than always having to rely on something visual. Yeah, constraints are they were a bit of a pain point in the other 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 projects that we did. So we're delighted that they're working as they should. As they should
in 5.4.
Yeah. That makes so many things a lot easier. And I think you touched on it before, James. Bringing more other parts of the engine into our characters, like materials and Niagara. I think that's really going to open up some really, really crazy stuff. Motion matching. I know there's the sample project released last week, I think. Haven't looked into it yet, but very excited what it might mean for doing block out layouts and things like that, just for character positioning around a level. And certainly getting more into the physical and procedural animation systems. There's a lot more Unreal can do besides keyframe animation, and we want to make sure we're taking advantage of it. So just wanted to change topic a little bit away from rigging and just describe a little bit more about our some parts of our animation pipeline in case it's useful to somebody. So we can't talk about animation without mentioning sequencer. So we went through a few iterations on our sequencer hierarchy. We started with this one on the left, I think, for our first two projects, which I'm just calling it like a sequence-centric sequencer setup. This is where we have a master sequence with sequence-wide subsequences, and also shots inside that have the shot-specific subsequences. So this was pretty intuitive, as shots are inside sequences, but it doesn't scale very well to larger sequences. And the reason is that as soon as you open that parent level sequence, the asset referencing tree in Unreal will cause every single asset that's referenced in every single shot to be loaded into memory, regardless of whether it's muted or in some shot that's not even playing. So it was fine for very, very small sequences, but not anything larger. And it also means that you can't open the shot in isolation. You always have to open the sequence first, because if you try to open the shot, you won't get the context from the sequence level layers, like the ones at the bottom from sequence level lighting and so on. So the next iteration was this shot-centric one. This is the one on the right-hand side. This is where the shot contains everything, including the sequence-wide level sequences. And have to shout out to the 2023 Unreal Fest talk by Cami Leach and Michael Neely for this. It's a much more robust approach. It solves all of the issues of the other implementation, but it doesn't have a great UX for dealing with multi-shot sequence workflow. The reason is you have to enter your sequence subsequence, like for example the blue lighting sequence there, via a particular shot. So that means if you're working across multiple shots, but you're kind of accessing it from a specific shot, when you move your timeline to go to your neighboring shots, those actors will get kind of despawned and respawned with different bindings, but the same name. And it was just very confusing for our artists working on the shot, because they'd rub their timeline around and things would just kind of break and pop in and out. So we kind of adopted this. This is our current implementation. It's essentially just a hybrid of both. So it has the same benefits as the shot-centric workflow, but it's got more of an intuitive multi-shot workflow. So if a user wants to work at sequence level, like they're doing sequence level lighting or something like that, they would use the entry point on the left to access their work file, and that's the sequence level entry point. So they pay the cost of loading all of those assets for the sequence, but they have to because they're working on the whole sequence. But if you're, most of the time, if you're an animator and you're working on a shot, you don't necessarily need to see your neighboring shots all the time, so you can access the shot level context. So it's a lot faster. And so we're currently looking at updating our sequencer hierarchy to respond to changes in the EDL, or like in the edit. So if a shot gets longer or shorter or reordered. And doing that when we have sequence-wide animation tracks is a very interesting problem. we still need to find a very clear and understandable way of handling it, because so sometimes your animation will be, you want it to be synchronized with the shot. Sometimes your sequence-wide animation, you want it to be synchronized with a shot. And other times your sequence-wide animation is more ambient, like it's traffic in the background, and you don't care if it slides around as the shot timings change. You just want your sequence-wide animation to be have good continuity. So there's, depending on the kind of animation you're doing at sequence level, you have to treat that differently. We're also looking at integrating generic shot group level sequences. It's actually described in the same talk I mentioned before. So this is for cases when you have sequences that intercut between different locations, or montage sequences, or any scenario where your kind of convenient unit of work doesn't line up with a sequence defined by editorial.
Similar lighting setups that might occur in different sequences. You can, for a lighter, you can contain together and you reuse the same lighting setup. So it's quite powerful.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say, okay, I want to work on this shot, and that shot, all at the same time, even though they're in different sequences. And then you just want to describe a little bit about the tools that we needed to make. So obviously, at this point, we've an extensive set of Maya linear content tools. So these were some of the ones we needed right off the bat coming to Unreal. Again, just in terms of animation and layout. First one is the layout publisher, getting things into animation. So we do layout in Unreal as well, and they work at sequence level, so multiple shots at a time. So this tool essentially just copies the character's props, sets up the camera from the layout sequence propagates it into each of the shots. So it's a starting point for the animator, and they can choose to use the setup, all the keys from the layout artist, or just delete them and start from scratch. Then an animation publisher. The process, how this works is we bake each character control rig to an animation sequence asset, and then we load that animation sequence asset back into the level sequence and mute the control rig. The reason we do that is because animation sequence assets are faster to evaluate than control rig, especially when you're going between multiple shots. And it's also less prone to a rig update breaking the shot, because you know you've got your animation baked. There's a few little subtleties if you're implementing it, like with post-process animation blueprints, you need to be mindful what aspects of those will be baked into your animation sequence, and you disable those features from your post-process graph after baking. Otherwise, the same effect will be applied twice, and you'll get kind of double dynamics, for example. And just as also to keep in mind that baking won't bake the result of deformers, because of course it's not baking the mesh, it's just baking the skinning. So your deformers, like lattices, will still need to evaluate. Then the animation asset library, this is kind of like, this is the picture in the middle. It's like the pose library, but for keyframe animation on control rigs, sparse, the authored keys from the animator, keeping those in a library. So we use it for walk cycles and run cycles and things like this. The sequence picker is that big long tool over there. This is to make it easier for the animator or whoever is working on shots to get to their work file. So like you saw, our sequencer hierarchy can be a bit confusing, and we keep changing it. So having something that's very simple for the artist to get to the correct work file and load the appropriate level is useful. And then Propify is a kind of a dynamic control rig we use for simple, rigidly articulating props, so we can bypass skinning and skeletal setup for those kind of props. So it's a lot like the FK control rig that comes with Unreal. It's just the controls on it are maybe a little friendlier to use. And yeah, the nightly render was kind of how animators submitted their work for review. This was a rendering process that ran on our render farm of one node. Rendered the episode every night, and it was for catching technical issues. So we'd review it with the CG soups in the morning.
And something with the nightly render, we originally thought that it would be good pass for our creatives to review, but since then we realised that the nightly render is good for a technical review, because we still needed those creative milestones for the approvers to say this is final lighting or this is final animation, because if they were looking at nightly render, they didn't have context of what they were looking at, and we were getting significant amount of creative notes saying, oh, that doesn't look good, or that's not working, or that, and we were like, oh, no, that's just the nightly render. So we've actually decoupled the nightly render from our official published lighting reviews or animation reviews. So that's a key point. It might be just useful that the nightly render is good as a technical review pass for people that can work in the details as well.
Yeah, so I think that's all we've got to say about animation. So thank you.